They assigned me to talk to it. That was my job. Not to repair it, not to arm it, not to wake it for battle. Those tasks belonged to the red-robed tech adepts with their incense burners and their binary hymns. My job was simpler and, as I would come to understand, far more terrible. I was to talk to it, to sit in the maintenance bay of the strike cruiser and speak to the ancient war machine while its occupant drifted in the liminal space between true death and synthetic life. The Ironclad, they called it, walk-off in number 7, Brother Eternal, the machine that remembers. I learned all its names over the years, and I learned that none of them captured what it truly was. My name is Randall Hess. I was born on a forge moon in the orbital rings of a gas giant whose name I no longer remember, raised in a hab block that shook with the vibration of macro furnaces, educated in a scolum that taught me to read, to write, to calculate supply manifests, and to never question the divine order of things. I was 17 when the Astartes came to our moon seeking replacement serfs for their vessels. I was 43 when they assigned me to the Ironclad. I am 71 now, and I have spent the last 28 years sitting in that maintenance bay, speaking to something that should have died 4,000 years ago. The first time I saw it, I wept. Not from fear, though fear came later. I wept from the sheer impossibility of what stood before me. The Ironclad was a walking sarcophagus, a tomb made mobile, a coffin that could kill. It stood 3 times the height of a mortal man, its chassis scarred by wounds that predated the founding of most Imperial worlds. The carapace was green once, I think, though now it was the color of old bronze left too long in rain. Imperial eagles adorned its shoulders, their detail worn smooth by centuries of conflict. Its weapon arms were folded against its chest in what the tech adepts called the pose of sacred rest, one ending in a power fist large enough to crush a tank, the other housing rotary cannons that had drunk the blood of species whose names were purged from Imperial records. But it was the viewing port that held me, a small rectangle of reinforced glass set into the central mass, no larger than a dinner plate, through which one could see something. A suggestion of flesh in suspension, a hint of cables merged with tissue, the ghost of a face that had once been human or superhuman or something between. I remember pressing my face to that glass the first night, alone in the maintenance bay while the machine slept its electronic sleep, and seeing one eye open. Just one. The other was long gone, replaced by a targeting lens that gleamed red in the darkness. But that single eye, that remnant of biology in a sea of blessed metal, looked at me with such profound exhaustion that I understood, in that moment, why they needed someone to talk to it. Chaplain Mordecai, who oversaw the spiritual well-being of our chapter's war machines, explained my duties in terms I initially mistook for metaphor. The Ironclad, he said, suffers from the weight of memory. 4,000 years of consciousness, interrupted only by the brief oblivion of combat and the longer darkness of sacred slumber. When it wakes between battles, when it stirs in its cradle of blessed machinery, it needs an anchor, something to remind it of the Imperium it fights for, something to tell it that humanity still exists, still struggles, still needs its protection. You will be that anchor, he told me. You will sit with it, you will speak with it, you will answer its questions, and you will listen to its answers, and you will never, ever tell anyone what passes between you. I thought it would be simple. I was wrong in ways that still haunt me. The Ironclad woke for the first time under my care 3 weeks into my assignment. I was in the maintenance bay performing my secondary duty of cataloging ammunition expenditure when I heard it, sound like a man drowning in machinery, like someone trying to scream through lungs filled with sacred oil. The chassis shuddered, the weapon arms unfolded with a hydraulic sigh, and then the Vox grill crackled to life, and a voice spoke that was not quite human and not quite machine, but something trapped eternally between. "What year is it?" the Ironclad asked. I told it. The machine was silent for a long moment, processing this information, and then it made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. The Vox grill rendered all emotions in the same metallic rasp, stripping them of their human nuance. "I have been asleep for 47 years, it said. What happened to the one who spoke to me before? The woman with the voice like water over stones? I did not know who it meant. The records showed no previous human attendant, only a rotating series of servitors who had performed basic maintenance and answered simple queries. But I learned, over the following weeks, that the Ironclad remembered things that were not in any record. It remembered conversations that had never officially occurred. It remembered names that had been erased from Imperial history. It remembered, and in its remembering, it needed someone to share the weight. "Tell me about your home," the Ironclad said during our second conversation. Its voice was clearer now, the Vox grill having adjusted to extended use. "Tell me about where you were born." I told it about the Forge Moon, the orange sky perpetually stained by industrial output, the way the hab block trembled during the third shift when the macro furnaces ran at full capacity, the smell of recycled air that had passed through 1,000,000 lungs before reaching mine. I told it about my mother, who worked in a textile manufactory until her fingers failed her, and my father, who I never knew because he had been conscripted into a labor battalion before my birth. I told it about the Skolum and the servitors that patrolled, the corridors and the prayer bells that rang every 4 hours to remind us that the God Emperor protected us. The Ironclad listened without interruption. When I finished, it was silent for so long that I thought it had returned to slumber. Then the Vox grill crackled, and it said something that changed everything. "I remember a sky like that," the Ironclad said, "orange and angry. But the world beneath it is gone now. I killed it. I killed it and everyone on it, and I cannot remember why." That was the first time I understood that my job was not to comfort the Ironclad. It was to hear its confessions. The part-time jobs, as the tech adepts called them, with what passed for humor among their kind, began during my 4th month. The Ironclad could not simply sit in its cradle between battles. The machine spirit within its chassis needed stimulation, or it would begin to degrade. The interface between flesh and metal required regular calibration, which meant the biological component, the ancient warrior entombed within, needed to maintain some level of cognitive function. Simply talking was not enough. The Ironclad needed purpose. They started with simple tasks: inventory verification, where the Ironclad would use its targeting systems to count and catalog ammunition stores; structural assessment, where it would walk the corridors of the strike cruiser and identify stress fractures in the hull plating; training exercises, where it would stand in the practice cages and allow novice Astartes to strike its armored hide, teaching them how to fight enemies larger than themselves. These tasks were beneath a warrior of its stature, and everyone knew it, but necessity outweighed dignity in the calculus of the Imperium. I accompanied the Ironclad during these tasks. That was my job. I walked beside it, a mortal ant next to a walking cathedral of death, and I talked to it about nothing and everything. I learned to read its moods through the subtle variations in its Vox output, the tiny fluctuations in pitch and static that indicated curiosity or irritation, or the deep, drowning melancholy that would sometimes claim it for days at a time. I learned that it preferred to walk the lower decks where the regular crew lived, not because it sought their company, but because their fear reminded it of what it was. "They look at me and see a weapon," the Ironclad told me once, as we walked past a group of ratings who pressed themselves against the walls, their eyes wide with terror. "They do not see me, they see what I can do. There is a difference." "What do you want them to see?" I asked. The Ironclad did not answer. It never answered when I asked it questions about itself. It only answered when I asked it questions about the past, about battles and campaigns and enemies long dead. It would speak for hours about the tactical disposition of forces at sieges, whose names meant nothing to me, about the tensile strength of various Xenos carapaces, about the optimal angle of approach for assaulting fortified positions. But when I asked it about itself, about the man it had been before the sarcophagus, it fell silent. I learned not to ask. The first confession came during a training exercise in the 5th month. The Ironclad was standing in practice cage 7, allowing a squad of scouts to practice with their combat blades against its armored legs. The exercise was nominally about teaching them to identify weak points in heavy armor, but the truth was simpler. There were no weak points. The scouts were learning humility, learning the futility of individual effort against certain kinds of enemies, learning that some things could only be overcome through overwhelming force or careful planning, never through heroism alone. I was sitting on a maintenance gantry above the cage watching when the Ironclad's Vox grill crackled. The scouts could not hear it. The output was directed specifically at me through a local channel. "I remember a boy like the tall one," the Ironclad said. "Brown hair, green eyes. He reminded me of someone, but I could not recall who. That was 300 years ago, give or take. I lost the ability to track time precisely around the second millennium of my interment." "What happened to him?" I asked. "He died. They all die. I trained 11,000 scouts over my existence. I remember each of their faces, but not their names. The names were the first things to go. I remember that the tall one with brown hair was named something that started with J. Jonathan perhaps, or Jeremiah, or something older that I cannot pronounce anymore. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked me what they see when they look at me. They see a weapon. But I was a teacher once, before the wars consumed everything. I taught boys like these how to hold a blade. I taught them how to stand, how to move, how to breathe. I taught them that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important. I taught them to die well." The Ironclad paused. Below, one of the scouts had found what he thought was a weakness in the knee joint. He was wrong, but the Ironclad allowed him to believe it for a moment longer. "I do not remember what I taught them after that," the Ironclad continued. "I do not remember when teaching stopped and killing started. There was a transition, I think. A moment when I realized that the boys I trained were not coming back from the wars, and that training more would not change that, and that the only thing I could do was kill faster than they could die. But I cannot remember when that moment was. It is lost somewhere in the first 1,000 years. The scout found his courage and drove his blade into the false weakness. The Ironclad moved then, faster than anything that size should move, and pinned the scout to the cage floor with one massive finger, not crushing him, just holding him there, helpless, while leaning down until the viewing port was inches from his face. "Lesson 1, the Ironclad said, its voice booming through the cage speakers now. "There are no weak points. There is only force applied correctly. Remember this, and you may survive. Forget it, and you will join the 11,000. The scout was white with terror. The Ironclad released him and returned to its original position, and the exercise continued, but something had changed. The scouts attacked with renewed ferocity, not from courage but from the desperate need to prove the Ironclad wrong. They failed, as they were meant to fail, but they learned something in that failure. I learned something too. I learned that the Ironclad remembered every face it had ever seen, every student it had ever taught, every warrior it had ever killed. 4,000 years of faces, trapped in a mind that could not die and could not forget. The discussions after that became different. The Ironclad began to ask me questions, and I began to understand why. "Do you dream?" it asked me one night, as we sat in the maintenance bay. The ship was in transit through the Imperium, and the walls occasionally rippled in ways that were best not examined too closely. The Ironclad had requested illumination be reduced to minimum levels, claiming it helped conserve power, but I knew the truth. In the darkness, it could pretend it was somewhere else. "Sometimes," I said. "Not often. The work keeps me tired. What do you dream about?" I thought about the question. My dreams were usually mundane, recycled fragments of daily life arranged in nonsensical patterns. I told it about the recurring dream I had of my mother, who had died 11 years before my assignment to the Ironclad, where she was trying to tell me something important, but I could never hear her over the sound of the macro furnaces. "She is trying to warn you," the Ironclad said. "Warn me about what? I do not know, but the dead always try to warn us in their way. I hear them sometimes, in the space between waking and sleeping. 11,000 voices plus all the others. They tell me things I do not want to know." "What do they tell you?" The Ironclad was silent for a long moment. Then they tell me I should have saved them. They tell me I could have saved them if I had been faster, stronger, better. They tell me that my survival is their accusation. That is not fair, I said. You cannot save everyone. I know, but fairness is a human concept, and I am no longer entirely human. The machine parts of me understand efficiency, acceptable losses, strategic necessity. The flesh parts of me, the flesh parts remember what it felt like to have a mother, to have a name that was not a number, to have a future that extended beyond the next battle. This was the most it had ever spoken about itself. I held my breath, afraid that any movement would break the spell. I had a name once, the Ironclad continued, before the interment, before the wounds that put me here. It was a good name, I think, strong. It meant something in a language that no longer exists, but they took it from me when they sealed me in this shell. They said it was necessary. They said the name belonged to the man, and the man was dead, and what remained was only the weapon. What was the name? I do not remember. That is the cruelest part. I remember that I had a name, I remember that it mattered, but the name itself is gone, erased. Not by time, but by choice. Someone decided that my name was dangerous, and they cut it out of me like a tumor. I wanted to say something comforting, but what comfort could I offer? The Ironclad had been betrayed by the very brothers it had served, stripped of identity as the price for continued existence. There was no comfort for that. There was only acknowledgement. I am sorry, I said, do not be. Sorrow requires hope, and hope requires a future. I have neither. I have only the present, stretched infinitely in both directions. I have only the maintenance bay and the battlefield, and the darkness between. The Ironclad fell silent then, and I let the silence stretch. Some things could not be filled with words. The second year brought new duties. The chapter had suffered losses in a campaign against greenskin raiders, and the Ironclad was needed more frequently for combat deployments. But between deployments, the part-time jobs continued, growing stranger as the tech adepts experimented with new forms of cognitive stimulation. They had me read to it. Not tactical manuals or historical records, which the Ironclad could access directly through its data feeds, but older things, poetry written before the Imperium existed, stories from Terra's ancient past, recovered from archaeological sites and preserved in data crystals older than most civilizations. I would sit in the maintenance bay and read aloud while the Ironclad listened, its single eye fixed on me with an intensity that was almost frightening. Again, it would say, when I finished a particularly affecting passage, read it again. I read it again and again and again. I read until my voice failed, and then I drank water and read some more. The Ironclad was insatiable, drinking in words like a man dying of thirst, and I began to understand that this was not entertainment. It was archaeology. The Ironclad was searching for something in those ancient texts, some fragment of the man it had been, some echo of a humanity that had been scraped away by millennia of war. There was a woman, it told me one night, after I had finished reading a love poem that was 7,000 years old. Before the chapter, before the transformation, there was a woman, and I think I loved her, though I am no longer certain what that word means. What happened to her? She died. They all died. The transformation process kills everyone you ever knew one way or another. Some die physically, others die in your memory, ground away by centuries of new experiences until only the fact of their existence remains. I know there was a woman. I know I loved her, but I cannot remember her face, her voice, her name. I cannot remember what it felt like to touch her. I cannot remember anything except the fact that she existed and that her existence mattered. Do you want to remember? The Ironclad made that sound again, the laugh sob that the Vox grill could not differentiate. I do not know. I have been asking myself that question for 3,000 years. If I remembered, truly remembered, would it bring me peace, or would it simply add another voice to the 11,000, another face to the gallery of the dead? I do not know. I suspect the answer is both. I kept reading after that, but the poems felt different. They were not just entertainment anymore. They were messages in bottles, thrown across an ocean of time, and the Ironclad was waiting on a shore I could not see, hoping that one of them might contain the answer it sought. The third year was when I began to notice the changes in myself. It started with dreams. My mother stopped trying to warn me. Instead, I dreamed of battles I had never fought, of weapons I had never held, of enemies I had never faced. I dreamed of standing in a field of corpses, looking down at my hands and seeing them covered in blood that was not red but green, then blue, then colors that had no name. I dreamed of hearing my name called by voices I did not recognize, and when I turned to answer, I found that I had no mouth. The Ironclad noticed. Of course it noticed. It noticed everything. "You are changing," it said during one of our maintenance bay discussions. The ship was in real space now, orbiting a death world that the chapter used for training exercises. Through the viewports, I could see jungles that actively tried to kill anything that entered them, oceans filled with predators the size of hab blocks, mountains that were actually the shells of creatures too vast to comprehend. "I am tired," I said. "The dreams keep me from sleeping properly." "That is not what I mean. Your speech patterns have shifted. Your vocabulary has expanded. You use words now that you did not know when we first met. You reference battles and campaigns that no mortal should know about." I had not noticed this. I tried to remember the last time I had spoken to another human being and realized with a chill that I could not. My entire world had narrowed to the maintenance bay, the Ironclad, and the confessions that passed between us. "What is happening to me?" I asked. "I do not know, but I suspect. The tech adepts speak of something called neural bleed. When a mortal spends too much time in proximity to certain war machines, the machine spirit can contaminate them. It is not possession, not exactly. It is more like osmosis. The mortal absorbs fragments of the machine's experience, incorporates them into their own consciousness. Usually it drives them mad. Am I going mad? I do not know. You do not seem mad. You seem different. More like me than you were before." This should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something closer to relief. I had been alone in this, I thought, alone with the confessions and the memories and the weight of 4,000 years of guilt. But if I was absorbing fragments of the Ironclad's experience, then perhaps I was not alone anymore. Perhaps we were becoming, in some small way, the same thing. "Is that why they assigned me to you?" I asked. "Did they know this would happen?" The tech adepts know many things. Whether they share those things truthfully is another matter. I have learned, over my long existence, that knowledge in this Imperium is always currency. It is hoarded, traded, weaponized. If they assigned you to me knowing you would change, it was for a purpose. Everything has a purpose in the Mechanicum's calculations. What purpose? The Ironclad was silent for a long time. When it spoke again, its voice was different, softer, more human somehow, though that should have been impossible. "I had an attendant before you," it said. "Before the woman with the voice like water. Before the servitors. There was a man, much like you, who sat with me and talked and listened. His name was Marcus, I think, or Matthew, something with an M. He was with me for 37 years, and over those years he changed in the ways you are changing now. He began to dream my dreams. He began to speak my words. He began to remember my memories. What happened to him? He died. They all die. But before he died, he did something remarkable. He wrote down everything he had absorbed, every memory, every confession, every fragment of my lost humanity. He transcribed it into a document that no tech adept ever saw, and he hid it somewhere on this ship. I do not know where. I did not ask, but I know it exists. And I know that my memories, or at least some of them, live on outside of this cage. I understood then. I understood why the Ironclad told me its secrets. I understood why it allowed me to absorb its experiences. I was not just a confessor. I was a vessel, a repository for things that could not be allowed to die with the machine. "You want me to do the same," I said. "You want me to write it down. I want you to choose." The difference is important. Marcus chose to write. The woman before him chose to sing. There are recordings hidden somewhere in the archive, hymns in a language I no longer speak but once knew intimately. Another attendant, centuries before, chose to paint. His work hangs in a gallery on a shrine world. attributed to an anonymous artist who saw visions of war. Each of them chose how to preserve what they absorbed. I am not asking you to write. I am asking you to think about what you will do with what you are becoming. That night I did not dream. I lay in my cot and stared at the ceiling and thought about choice, about purpose, about what it meant to carry someone else's memories. I thought about my mother and her warnings that I could never hear. I thought about the Ironclad and its confessions that I could never forget. I thought about the woman with the voice like water, and Marcus with his hidden document, and the painter whose visions of war hung in galleries across the sector. I was becoming part of a lineage, a chain of mortals stretching back through millennia, each one absorbing a fragment of the Ironclad's soul and carrying it forward into the future. We were not attendants, we were apostles. We were the keepers of a gospel written in neural bleed and whispered confession, the only ones who knew the true story of the weapon that had once been a man. And I had to decide what I would do with that knowledge. The fourth year brought war, and war changed everything. The chapter was deployed against a splinter fleet of tyrannic bioorganisms, and the Ironclad was activated for sustained combat operations for the first time since my assignment. I was not permitted to accompany it to the surface. Instead, I watched from the observation deck of the strike cruiser as drop pods fell like burning tears, carrying my charge into battles that would test even its ancient fury. The Vox feeds were restricted, but I had learned over the years how to access certain channels that were not meant for mortals. I listened as the Ironclad waded into the swarm, its weapons singing hymns of destruction, its voice booming commands that were obeyed by warriors who had been children when I was born. I heard it laugh once, a genuine laugh that the Vox grill could not entirely strip of joy. It was happy, I realized. For the first time since I had known it, the Ironclad was truly happy, because it was doing what it was made to do. The battle lasted 17 days. 17 days of constant combat, of ammunition resupply and field repairs, and the endless grinding attrition of war against an enemy that did not know fear or fatigue. I slept in shifts, waking every few hours to check the Vox feeds, to verify that the Ironclad still lived, that its beacon still pulsed somewhere on that death world. On the 14th day, the beacon went silent. I do not remember much of the next 3 days. I remember screaming at tech adepts, demanding information they did not have. I remember trying to commandeer a shuttle to fly to the surface, being restrained by serfs who did not understand why I cared so much about a machine. I remember standing at the observation deck for hours, watching the planet burn, whispering prayers to an emperor I was not certain still listened. On the 17th day, a transport rose from the surface. It carried 7 survivors out of the 300 who had deployed. It carried ammunition crates that were empty, medical supplies that were exhausted, and 1 Ironclad that was barely functional. I was in the landing bay when they brought it aboard. The chassis was barely recognizable. Half of the armor plating was gone, ripped away by claws larger than my body. The power fist was missing entirely, torn off at the shoulder joint. The rotary cannons were fused into a single mass of molten metal, the barrels having overheated from constant firing, and the viewing port was cracked, leaking amniotic fluid that smelled like death and machine oil. But the eye was open. That single, exhausted eye looked at me from across the landing bay, and the Vox grill crackled, and a voice spoke that was barely audible above the chaos of the med teams and the tech adepts and the screaming of wounded warriors. "Randall," the Ironclad said. "Just my name. Nothing else. But in that name was everything: relief, gratitude, a connection that transcended the boundaries between mortal and machine. I ran to it. I do not remember deciding to run. My body simply moved, carrying me across the landing bay, past the med teams and the tech adepts, until I was standing at the base of the war machine that had become my entire world. I pressed my hand against its damaged hull, feeling the heat of abused engines, the vibration of failing systems, the pulse of something that might have been a heartbeat or might have been hydraulic fluid. "I am here," I said. "I am here." "I know," the Ironclad said. "I knew you would be. Across 17 days and 100 battles and the deaths of 293 brothers, I knew you would be here when I returned. That knowledge kept me fighting when I should have fallen. That knowledge kept my finger on the trigger when my ammunition ran out and I had to use my fists. That knowledge is why I am still alive, if alive is the right word for what I am. The tech adepts arrived then, bustling and efficient, already beginning the sacred rituals of repair. They pushed me aside with practiced indifference, too focused on their work to notice the tears streaming down my face. I did not resist. I stepped back and watched as they carried my charge to the maintenance bay, trailing sacred oil and profane fluids, the remains of a warrior who had fought 17 days because I was waiting. That was when I understood what I had become. Not an attendant, not even an apostle. I had become an anchor, as Chaplain Mordecai had said all those years ago, but not in the way he had meant. I was not anchoring the Ironclad to humanity, I was anchoring it to hope. I was the reason it continued to fight, the purpose that gave meaning to its endless existence. Without me, it would have given up centuries ago. Without me, it would have let the darkness take it, welcomed the oblivion that it could never truly achieve. I was not just carrying its memories, I was carrying its will to live. The repairs took 4 months. During that time, I was not permitted to see the Ironclad. Security protocols, the tech adepts said. The machine's spirit is unstable after such trauma. It needs time to heal, to recalibrate, to remember what it is. I accepted their explanations because I had no choice, but I did not believe them. I knew with a certainty that came from somewhere outside myself that they were testing something, measuring something, trying to determine how far the neural bleed had progressed. They were not wrong to be concerned. During those 4 months, my changes accelerated. I began to remember things I had never experienced. The fall of fortress worlds whose names were classified. The faces of brothers who had died before I was born. The feeling of crushing an enemy's skull with a power fist, of burning a path through hostile terrain with rotary cannons, of standing alone against horrors that would shatter a mortal mind, and laughing because death would be a release I could never have. These memories were not dreams anymore. They were simply memories, as real and immediate as my recollections of my mother's face or the sound of the Skolam prayer bells. I was becoming the Ironclad, or at least, I was becoming the vessel that contained everything the Ironclad had been. When they finally allowed me back into the maintenance bay, I found something had changed. The Ironclad had been repaired, rebuilt, restored to a state of functionality that was probably better than before. New armor plating gleamed in the dim light. A new power fist flexed experimentally. New rotary cannons hummed with barely contained power, but the eye that looked at me from the viewing port was different, older somehow, more tired. They wanted to wipe me, the Ironclad said, without preamble. The chaplain proposed a full cognitive purge. He said I had become too attached to mortal concerns. He said I was compromising my effectiveness as a weapon. What happened? I refused. I have that right, technically. The ancient compact between flesh and machine grants me sovereignty over my own consciousness, even when that consciousness is judged inconvenient. They cannot force me to forget without my consent, and I did not give consent. Why not? The Ironclad was silent for a long moment. Then, because if I forgot, I would lose you. Not just the memory of you, but the connection between us. The neural bleed runs both ways, Randall. You have absorbed fragments of me, but I have also absorbed fragments of you. Your fears, your hopes, your love for a mother who died trying to warn you of something you could never hear. If they purged me, all of that would be lost, and I would be alone again in a way I have not been alone for 4 years. I stepped closer to the viewing port. Inside, behind the cracked glass that had been replaced with something newer and clearer, I could see the face of the thing that had once been a man, more clearly than I had ever seen it before. Not a face exactly, a suggestion of features in a mass of cables and tubes and preserved tissue. But there, behind the targeting lens and the neural interfaces and the sacred machinery, was something that looked almost human. I am not leaving, I said. I know. I knew before you said it. I know everything you know now, Randall. I know that you have been writing. I know that you have hidden your documents in the same place Marcus hid his. I know that you have been recording our conversations, transcribing our confessions, preserving everything that passes between us. I had not told anyone about the writing. I had been doing it in secret, convinced that the tech adepts would confiscate my work if they discovered it. But of course the Ironclad knew. The neural bleed ran both ways. Are you angry? I asked. No, I am grateful. You are doing what I cannot do, giving my memories a chance to outlive this shell. When I finally fall, when the damage is too great and the repairs too expensive and they decide to let me slip into the darkness, something will remain. You will remain. My confessions will remain. The truth of what I was before they turned me into this will remain. I do not want you to fall. I know. But it is coming, Randall. Perhaps not soon. Perhaps not for centuries. But the math is simple. Every battle damages me. Every repair is slightly less complete than the last. The technology that created me is lost, and the technology that maintains me is degrading. Eventually there will be a battle that I do not survive, or a damage that cannot be repaired, or a decision that I am no longer worth the resources. What can I do? Nothing. Everything. You can keep talking to me. You can keep listening. You can keep writing down what we discuss, preserving what would otherwise be lost. And when the end comes, you can tell them who I was. Not the weapon they see, not the machine they maintain, the man, the teacher, the one who loved a woman whose name he cannot remember. Tell them that, and I will have lived in some small way beyond this cage. I stayed in the maintenance bay that night, not in my usual chair, but pressed against the hull of the Ironclad, feeling its heartbeat through the metal, letting the neural bleed wash over me in waves of shared consciousness. I dreamed while awake, seeing through its eye and my own simultaneously, experiencing the universe as two beings who were slowly becoming one. I understood then what the tech adepts were measuring. They wanted to know how far the merger had progressed. They wanted to know if I could be separated from the Ironclad, or if we had become, in some fundamental way, a single entity in two bodies. I suspected I already knew the answer. We had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. I was no longer Randall Hess, mortal attendant. I was Randall Hess, the living memory of a weapon that had once been a man, carrying within me 4,000 years of love and loss and violence and hope. And I would not let that memory die. The 5th year brought changes that none of us expected. The chaplain who had wanted to purge the Ironclad's consciousness was killed in an action against heretic forces, struck down by a blade that burned with warp fire. His replacement was a younger man, more practical, less concerned with doctrinal purity. Under his leadership, the attitude toward my relationship with the Ironclad shifted from suspicious tolerance to something approaching acceptance. I was officially designated as a neural auxiliary, a formal recognition that I was no longer entirely separate from the machine I served. The designation came with privileges, access to restricted archives, permission to attend strategic briefings, a seat at the table when the chapter's commanders discussed deployments and objectives. I did not speak at these meetings. I did not need to. The Ironclad spoke through me when necessary, using our connection to convey tactical insights that would have taken hours to translate through normal channels. We became, in the eyes of the chapter, a single tactical asset, the Ironclad and its auxiliary, the weapon and its voice. When they deployed us together, me riding in a transport that followed the Ironclad's trajectory, maintaining our connection across the chaos of combat. I experienced battle through the Ironclad's senses while remaining physically safe, feeding it information from the transport's scanners, alerting it to threats it might have missed. It was efficient. The commanders loved efficiency. What they did not understand was that efficiency was only a byproduct. The true purpose of our connection was something far more personal. The Ironclad began to remember. Not everything. The memories that had been deliberately erased were still gone, stripped away by whatever process the chapter used to create its weapons. But the memories that had simply faded, the ones lost to time rather than intent, began to resurface. Names came back first. The name of the woman it had loved, Helena. The name of its home world, Thessaly Prime. The name it had carried before the interment, the one it thought was lost forever, Gabriel. Gabriel, a messenger, a herald. How appropriate, I thought, for a being that had spent 4,000 years carrying messages of death. With the names came context. Helena had been a scholar, a student of ancient languages, the one who had taught Gabriel the poems I now read to the Ironclad. Thessaly Prime had been a garden world, green and gentle, destroyed in a war that predated the current age of the Imperium. Gabriel had been a warrior, yes, but also a poet, a lover, a man who believed that violence was a necessary evil rather than a sacred calling. They told me I was chosen for honor, the Ironclad, Gabriel told me one night. They said my wounds were too severe, my body too damaged, but my spirit too valuable to lose. They said the sarcophagus was a gift, a second life, an opportunity to serve the Emperor until the end of time itself. They did not tell me what that service would cost. What did it cost? Everything. My name, my memories, my ability to touch, to taste, to feel anything but the feedback from my weapon systems, my sense of time, my connection to my brothers, who aged and died while I remained frozen in this shell. My humanity, Randall. They took my humanity and gave me eternity, and the mathematics of that exchange become more terrible with every passing century. Was it worth it? Gabriel was silent for a long moment, then yes and no. I have saved worlds, I have protected billions of lives that would have been lost without my intervention. I have been a bulwark against darkness in ages when darkness seemed absolute. That is worth something. But I have also killed things that did not deserve to die. I have burned civilizations that might have been redeemed. I have been a weapon in the hands of men who did not always wield me wisely. That costs something too. The balance. I do not know where the balance falls. I suspect I never will. This was the most honest he had ever been. Not the Ironclad, the weapon, the machine. Gabriel, the man who had been buried inside. I treasured that honesty more than I could express. We continued to talk, night after night, battle after battle, year after year. The neural bleed deepened until I could no longer tell where my thoughts ended and his began. I wrote down everything, filling document after document with the recovered memories of a man who had been dead for 4,000 years but refused to stop living. I hid the documents in the same place Marcus had hidden his, adding to an archive that now spanned millennia. And then, in the 7th year, I found Marcus's documents. I had known they existed. Gabriel had told me about them, but I had not searched for them, respecting the privacy of my predecessor, the chain of apostles stretching back through time. It was Gabriel who finally told me where to look, sharing a memory that Marcus had shared with him decades before his death, a maintenance crawl space behind the secondary plasma conduits on Deck 17, a sealed container marked with a symbol that no one in the chapter would recognize. I found the container exactly where Gabriel said it would be. Inside were 17 bound volumes, handwritten, the ink faded but still legible. Marcus's transcripts, the confessions of an ironclad named Gabriel, recorded by a mortal who had absorbed enough of the machine's memories to understand what he was hearing. I read them all, over the course of 3 sleepless weeks. Marcus had been a gifted writer, more talented than me, able to capture not just the content of Gabriel's confessions but the emotional weight behind them. I learned things that Gabriel had forgotten, details that the neural bleed had not preserved, the name of Helena's favorite flower, midnight orchid, the color of Gabriel's eyes before they replaced them with targeting systems, gray like storm clouds. The words of the oath Gabriel had sworn when he first became a warrior, before the transformation, before the chapter. I am the shield between darkness and light. I am the voice that speaks when all others fall silent. I am Gabriel, and I will not yield. I wept as I read, not from grief, but from recognition. These were my memories now, too. Gabriel's love for Helena was my love. Gabriel's oath was my oath. We had become so intertwined that the distinction between us was academic, a legal fiction maintained for the convenience of the chapter's record keepers. When I returned to the maintenance bay with Marcus's documents, Gabriel was waiting. The Ironclad's eye tracked my approach, and I felt the familiar warmth of our connection, the neural bleed pulsing between us like a shared heartbeat. "You found them," Gabriel said. "I found them." And I sat down in my usual chair, the documents cradled in my arms like precious artifacts. "You never told me about the oath. I did not remember the oath. Not until now. But seeing it through your eyes, reading Marcus's transcription of a conversation I no longer recall, it brings something back. Not the memory itself, the shape of it, the weight. Do you remember what it felt like to swear it? No. But I remember what it meant. It meant that I chose this. Not the sarcophagus, not the eternity gave me, but the original choice, the decision to fight, the decision to become something more than human for the sake of those who could not fight for themselves. I chose that, Randall. Whatever came after, that choice was mine. I understood then why Gabriel had wanted me to find the documents, not for the information they contained, but for the context they provided. The chain of apostles was not just preserving memories, it was preserving identity. Each of us, from Marcus to the painter to the woman who sang to me, had contributed pieces to a mosaic that showed who Gabriel truly was. Not a weapon, not a machine, a man who had made a choice that had stretched across 4,000 years and countless battles, a choice that defined him more than any of the things that had been done to him. "You are not a weapon," I said. "I am what they made me." "No, you are what you chose to be. They gave you the body, they gave you the mission, but the choice was always yours. The choice to fight, the choice to remember, the choice to let mortals like me inside your consciousness, to share your burden, to carry your story forward. That is not what weapons do, that is what people do." Gabriel was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, more human than I had ever heard it. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For reminding me. I forget sometimes between the battles and the repairs and the endless grinding of time. I forget that there was a man before the machine. You helped me remember. I stayed in the maintenance bay that night as I often did now. But this time felt different. This time felt like a turning point, a moment when something fundamental shifted between us. We were no longer attendant and machine, confessor and sinner, apostle and God. We were partners, we were family, we were two beings who had become one through years of shared experience and neural bleed and late-night conversations about love and loss and the meaning of an existence that refused to end. I did not know then that our time was running out. I did not know that the mathematics Gabriel had described, the slow accumulation of damage and degradation, were approaching their inevitable conclusion. I did not know that the next battle would be the last, but I know now, and I know what I must do. The 8th year began with fire and ended with silence. The chapter was deployed against a force of traitor legionnaires, fallen warriors who had once served the same emperor that Gabriel defended. The campaign was brutal from the start, the enemy's forces augmented by demonic allies and forbidden technologies. World after world fell to their advance, and world after world the chapter retook, paying in blood and lives for every victory. Gabriel fought in every engagement. I accompanied him in the transports, maintaining our connection, feeding him tactical data while he fed me glimpses of the carnage. It was terrible and beautiful and sacred in ways I cannot describe. The Ironclad moved through the enemy like vengeance incarnate, 4,000 years of combat experience expressing itself through rotary cannons and power fists, and the unshakable determination of a man who had chosen to become a monster so others would not have to. The final battle was on a world whose name I will not record. The enemy had fortified a mountain range, honeycombed with tunnels and bunkers, defended by traitors who had been killing for millennia, and daemon hosts who had never truly lived. The chapter's commanders planned a three-pronged assault, with Gabriel leading the central thrust. I watched through his eye as the assault began. The first wave of defenses fell within hours, their complex traps and automated weapons systems no match for Gabriel's ancient experience. The second wave took longer, the enemy committing their reserve forces in a desperate attempt to hold. By the third wave, the chapter had taken 40% casualties, and Gabriel's ammunition reserves were running dangerously low. I felt it when the first critical hit struck. A lance of pure chaotic energy, fired from a weapon that should not have existed, punching through Gabriel's rear armor and destroying the primary power coupling. The Ironclad staggered, systems failing in cascade, and for one terrible moment I thought it was over. Then Gabriel laughed. "That tickled," he said over the Vox, and charged forward into the enemy position with nothing but his power, fist, and 4,000 years of rage. The fight that followed lasted 3 hours and 17 minutes. I felt every second of it through our connection, the impact of blows given and received, the heat of failing systems, the pain because there was pain, because the flesh inside the machine was still flesh and could still suffer. I felt Gabriel dying by degrees, and I could do nothing but watch and remember and bear witness. He killed the enemy commander with his bare hands, if hands was the right word for the manipulator appendages that remained after his power fist was torn away. He crushed the demon host with his remaining mass, using his own dying body as a weapon. He stood in the ruins of the enemy command bunker, surrounded by the corpses of creatures that had terrorized star systems, and he spoke one final time. "Randall," he said, "are you there?" "I am here," I said. "I am always here. I know. I have always known. That is why I can let go now. Because you are there and you will remember, and what I was will not be lost." "Gabriel, shh, listen. The oath. Remember the oath." I remembered. "I am the shield between darkness and light. I am the voice that speaks when all others fall silent. I am Gabriel and I will not yield." "You did not yield," I said. "No, I never yielded. In 4,000 years, across 1,000,000 battles, against enemies that would shatter sanity and destroy hope, I never yielded. Remember that. Tell them. Tell everyone who reads your documents, who finds Marcus's transcripts, who discovers the paintings and the songs and all the fragments we have left behind. Tell them that Gabriel, the shield between darkness and light, died without yielding. I will tell them." "Good, good." The Vox grill crackled one final time, then silence. I felt the moment of disconnection like a physical amputation. 28 years of neural bleed, 28 years of shared consciousness severed in an instant. The pain was indescribable. I fell to the deck of the transport, screaming, clawing at my own head as if I could physically reconnect the link that had been broken. The recovery took months. The tech adept said I was lucky to survive.